All right. Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate you taking the time to join us for this great conversation. Just a few notes here. Please feel free to use the chat. We will save some time at the end to answer questions. So if you think of them along the way, feel free to type them in and we can try and get to them there, or we can have a session where we do some raise hands at the end since it's a small group and have a bit more conversation with the audience. And with that, I'd like to pass it to my colleague, Brigitte Vizina.
Thank you, Jocelyn, and hello and welcome everyone to our Creative Commons Open Culture Live webinar on changing the subject and respectful terminologies. So my name is Brigitte Vizina, and I'm the Director of Policy and Open Culture here at Creative Commons. I lead our Open Culture program, working with Jocelyn Miara, and who will be moderating this panel, as well as Connor Benedict, who's also here with us. This is the second webinar in our Open Culture Live series. So the goal of that series is really to address emerging and topical issues and challenges that the open culture community is facing. The community is trying to provide better, greater, more meaningful, and importantly, more responsible, more respectful access to cultural heritage. So the first of our webinar was held in July, and there we covered more like the basics of open culture. I'd invite you to watch it at your leisure if you want to know more about our open culture program and really some of the more introductory questions about copyright and open licensing and the benefits of open culture. So I'll share a link in the chat and you can watch this later on. But for now, today's topic is really dear to my heart. It falls within the scope of our strategic ambition at CC to promote better sharing. So that is broad access and reuse that is done ethically, equitably, respectfully, and responsibly. So taking into account not only the copyright status of a cultural heritage item, whether it's in copyright or in the public domain, but also any other norms or governance mechanisms that might govern it, might determine access and use conditions, and also the context in which it forms part of any given collection today. So this topic of respectful terminologies came about because we've been witnessing that when a cultural heritage item is shared online, it's generally accompanied by a single, often dated narrative. And that is the one of the institution that holds it. And often that narrative that's reflected in descriptions and metadata elements is or can be problematic, can be biased, can be offensive, or it might not properly account for the multiple stories and perspectives that form the context around which the object is being shared. And so as more and more institutions are reckoning with their past, in such cases where the cultural heritage that they hold today was acquired, for example, during colonial times, or the heritage was looted or stolen or otherwise illegally severed from its community. So these institutions are also reviewing how the heritage that they care for is being respectfully treated. And that includes deep reflections about the words they choose to talk about them, their meanings, and the values that they convey, but also, and very importantly, whose voices are being promoted and heard. So I'm very pleased that we'll get to hear from experts here today on this topic. I'm sure that they will help us to shed light on how institutions and those that openly share collections can confront their past, its injustices, its inequalities, and adopt more respectful terminologies to change the subject. So over to you, Jocelyn, to kickstart the conversation.
Thank you so much. So I'll start by introducing our first panelist, Jill Barrett, who is a librarian at Dartmouth College, specializing in the Romance languages and Latin America, Latino, and Caribbean studies. She earned a BA in French and Comparative Literature from Bryn Mawr College, an MFA in Creative Writing from the New School, and an MLIS from Rutgers University. She was also the co-director and co-producer of the 2019 documentary film Change the Subject, which inspired a grassroots movement for reparative cataloging in libraries worldwide. I'll pass it along to you, Jill.
Thank you so much, Jocelyn. Thank you, Brigitte, for your introduction. I'm assuming everyone can hear me okay? All right, great. Yeah, it's great to be here. Thank you for the invitation. And I guess I'll just give like a little bit of background on why I think I was invited to join you today. And I'm going to go back in time to just give you a little bit of the context for the film that Jocelyn just referenced, Change the Subject. So in the second year of my job here at Dartmouth College as a librarian, I was meeting with a student, Melissa Padilla, for a research consultation. Melissa was doing an independent study project on undocumented student activism. And we were working together, librarian and student, consulting the library catalog for books on her topic. And it was during this consultation when we came across a catalog record for a really relevant looking book for which the subject heading, the Library of Congress subject heading, illegal aliens, had been assigned. And Melissa noticed this subject heading and immediately asked why the library was using those words. And I found myself in the awkward and truly undesirable position of having to explain that the Library of Congress subject headings were notoriously problematic, but that they were one of the only tools we had to organize, a vast quantity of information. And of course, my explanations at the time did nothing to satisfy Melissa. And when she left my office, I really felt a profound sense of failure and regret about our encounter because I could see firsthand that the subject heading had harmed her and that I, in a sense, had harmed her in the process. 2 weeks after that encounter with Melissa, student activists at Dartmouth released a set of demands that are referred to as the Freedom Budget. And in that document, there was a demand that Melissa and other students had written, and I'm going to read it. The demand is, and I'll share a link in the chat to the document, but ban the use of, quote, illegal aliens, illegal immigrants, wetback, and any racially charged term on Dartmouth-sanctioned programming, materials, and locations. The library search catalog system shall use undocumented instead of illegal in reference to immigrants. And so this document came out, these demands came out, there was a lot of attention on campus to them. And basically, I just, felt this responsibility to respond to the students, to talk to them. This in turn led to the library working with the students to eventually petition the Library of Congress to change the subject heading. I'm not going to go through all of the twists and turns that came after that. You can watch my documentary that I made with Melissa, Oscar Cornejo Cacaceres, and Sawyer Broadley, and that's Changed the Subject. But I could definitely say that this story has really shaped, the last 10 years of my career. It's been a constant companion. But more importantly, the film has made a big impact on the library profession and has really been a catalyst for a movement in reparative cataloging at both the local level and the wider system level. So I'm here, I guess, to speak to that. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Jill. Our next speaker is Marco Redina, who has spent 2 decades working with museums, archives, libraries, and galleries in Europe, supporting their digital transformation, advocating for open access, and fostering innovation in the cultural heritage sector. He serves on the board of directors for a variety of international cultural heritage networks, including the European Fashion Heritage Association, the Jewish Heritage Network, the Euroscreen Foundation, and is currently a leading member of the De-Bias Project, which aims to promote a more inclusive and respectful approach to describing cultural heritage resources. And I'll go ahead and let you talk a bit more about your work, Marco.
Yeah, thank you, Jocelyn, and thank you, Brigitte, for inviting me. It's a really pleasure to be with such interesting panelists, colleagues. the first disclaimer I want to do is Brigitte defined it as experts on the topic. I'm not, so I want to say this beforehand. I'm just trying to tackle these issues of problematic terminology in cultural heritage metadata relatively recently. But I'm running with other colleagues that are also here in this webinar now, a project which is very much into this topic, and I'm going to share a couple of slides. I suppose you are seeing them, right? Okay. Yeah, indeed, I'm going to talk about the bias, which is a project co-funded by the European Union in the framework of the Digital Europe program. It's a 2-year project that started in January 2023. So we are almost in the middle of its life. These are the project partners. Its aim is to improve descriptions of cultural heritage collections and cultural heritage metadata in general by making outdated and offensive language visible and guiding users in understanding the original context of this language, of these terms, and their problematic background. To reach this goal, the project is first defining a multilingual vocabulary co-created with marginalized communities, researchers, and cultural heritage professionals that will pair biased language with contextual information and suggestion for appropriate terms. It will have the form of a knowledge graph, but I won't go into the technical detail of this. The vocabulary will be focused on 3 main topics: migration and colonial past, gender and sexual identity, ethnicity and ethno-religious identity. A crucial aspect of this activity is the engagement, as I mentioned before, of different affected communities in order to give them the space and agency to change the way in which cultural artifacts have been described so far due to obsolete colonial or patriarchal and hegemonic policies. And that's why we chose a bottom-up approach to the definition of this vocabulary. Here you can see, I will change slide. Here you can see the summarize the different projects activities. The second step after the creation of this vocabulary, which is a process still in the making, the second step of the project is focused on the development of an AI-powered tool for the automatic detection of problematic and outdated terms in cultural heritage metadata that we use as a reference, the vocabulary that we co-created, providing contextual information about their problematic background. This tool will be integrated in the Europeana website. Europeana is the European platform for digital cultural heritage that makes available digitized collection, a total of more than 50 million records from more than 4,000 institutions across Europe. So a good test bed. How this will work practically on the Europeana portal. We are not there yet, so these are a series of mock-up that we made just to let you understand how this is going to work. So a visitor will come on Europeana and make a search. She will land on a search result page, and eventually she will click on an item. And then in this case, an item page with the warning of a potential presence of offensive or distressing terms will appear. The visitor can click to view the content anyway, or just move away, of course. And the tool will have highlighted the inappropriate term. And when the visitor will click on the bias icon, she will be able to see some contextual information about the term. So this is in brief how this will work. The project will also build the capacity of cultural heritage institutions to understand, analyze, and address bias in their collections by offering capacity building workshops and a knowledge base with materials for cultural heritage professionals. This QR code will lead you to the project webpage, and you can follow us on social media using the hashtag the bias. And this was a very brief introduction of the project. And now we'll stop sharing my screen. And that's all.
Thank you so much, Marco. So next I'll introduce Amanda Figueroa. Amanda is the platform director at Curationist, where she brings 12 years of experience in arts and culture, community engagement, and ethically sustainable strategy to the field of open access. She was raised at the US-Mexico border, and after doctoral study at Harvard University, she currently resides in Brooklyn, New York. I'll pass it to you, Amanda.
Hi, good morning, everyone. All those things Jocelyn said are true, which is kind of a delight. I'm really happy to be here. Thank you so much, Creative Commons, for having me, having all of us to have this really important conversation. I'm going to start by telling you a little bit about what we do at Curationist. I'm going to tell you a little bit about why I think that's important. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we have coming up. And then I'm excited to dig into conversation. At Curationist, which you can go see at curationist.org, we have what is at heart a search aggregator, similar to what Marco talked about with Europeana. We intake open access, digitized cultural heritage object records, images, and their metadata currently from 11 different institutional partners into one searchable database at curationist.org. It used to be the case that if you wanted to find a certain image, or if you wanted to find a certain type of digitized open access image, you would have to search at the Brooklyn Museum, at the British Museum, at the Reykjavik Museum. And on our platform, you can find all these things in one place. This is my software development team assures me a huge technical undertaking. I'm delighted that it works. But along the way to developing the sort of metadata normalization processes that make this possible, we realized we have an incredible opportunity not simply to make metadata talk to each other, but also add our own metadata to it. We have this opportunity to see what's being taken in from these sources, realize that, as Bridget said in the introduction to our webinar today, that a lot of these metadata records are evidence of a single narrative that's often steeped in colonialism and white supremacy. And we have a chance to not edit, not correct, and certainly not remove, but add a second narrative, augment that metadata with additional terms, additional findings, additional research on things like provenance, on things like subject records, that not only make these objects more findable, when you have more search terms, things are easier to find, but also add sort of more contextual information to these object records. We have some amazing examples. I think I'll be able to dig into a little bit more later. If not, please send me a message afterwards. It's a great joy in my life to be able to do this work, but also to be able to show it to people. But I really tend to think about this work as work of decolonization in metadata. Every time I talk about this, it's important that I say, although I do talk about decolonization in a digital space, that does not make me or this project any less committed to actual material return of land and indigenous objects decolonization. This is just the vector through which I can advocate for those things as well. So we've been doing this work for a while now. We have an amazing team of digital archivists, metadata specialists, and we also take on art writers and academic fellows who also do this research in our collections, in our database. And I found that this work of decolonizing metadata does three really important things. The first is that it adds vital information to the record of artworks and artifacts that was otherwise not preserved during colonization. That means that we're often adding things like original provenance records. We're also adding further information about the use of indigenous objects. And adding greater subject matter tags to sort of further contextualize what these objects are, what they do, where they come from. Second of all, decolonizing metadata in this way raises indigenous knowledge about the creation, use, and context of the object to a position of parity with institutions. Right now, all the metadata, or almost all the metadata that we take in, was written by Western or white curators at some point in history, and the indigenous voices, or the voices of the cultures that originally created these objects and artworks, is often in the margins, in both a cultural, socio-political sense, but also in a very literal look at this thing on the web page sense. And so when we add these new metadata records, they appear right there with the original records that come through in institutions. So even visually, they are given that level of knowledge parity that is so important. And then third of all, adding metadata in this way brings historic objects into a contemporary context. It makes them more searchable and therefore more accessible to the world, not only by increasing the number of search terms that make these objects findable, that sort of raises them to your top page of search results, but also in ways that flag the bias in the original metadata as information in its own right. It's important to know that these objects were originally left without accurate provenance records. I don't love that that happens. I feel deeply pained to know that so much knowledge about the original source of these objects was lost. But that loss is important. That loss tells us something about the history of the world. And so it's a challenge for us every day to strike the right balance, but those three outcomes are so important to me. That being said, we have currently about 4.4 million object records in our database. That's insane. That's way too many records for my archivist team, my metadata team, my critics, my fellows to ever be able to give in-depth attention to every single object record. I know that's true because museums and institutions with far bigger budgets than mine can't manage to do that for their collections alone. This is a huge, huge undertaking. So we are right now exploring ways that technology can help augment this process, can help flag things that are most in need of this attention. One of those things we're working on is natural language processing, especially in terms of our search function. That's going to help us form stronger links between metadata terms. But one of the most important facets of that work is to ensure that all of those linked terms, the way that we're associating Indigenous Canadian with something that's tagged Inuit, for example, always gets a level of human review, and that we're not just offloading the important, sensitive cultural work of path making simply to a machine, because I think we're all on this call aware of the dangers and biases that already exist in AI. We're also working on further language support. Right now, almost all the metadata in our database is written in English, and that's fine. But we also have a lot of objects and artifacts that come from non-English speaking cultures, and being able to represent that metadata in the original language, or in as close to the original language as we can get, is absolutely a cause that's central to my heart. And then lastly, we're also working on developing tools, workflows, and just broad level support for small museums and archives. I call them grassroots level organizations that don't have the same budget, that don't have the same staff capacity, that don't have the same institutional knowledge on how to digitize and license cultural heritage images. So yeah, lots going on for us, but it's work that I'm thrilled to do.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And our last speaker that I want to introduce is Karma Chitrawati, a lecturer at Udayana University. She is a lecturer in Balinese language program in the Balinese language program in Bali. She is a Balinese and active volunteer in the Wikimedia Denspar community. She's focused on serving Balinese traditional manuscripts, Lontar, and began her involvement in the Wikimedia project in 2019 and developed Wiki Pustaka, the library consisting of Balinese language resources for the Balinese community. So I'll pass it to you, Chitra.
Thank you so much, Jocelyn. Hello, everyone. So I'm so glad here in this webinar. So let me share my share screen first. Well, yeah, you can see my screen. Yeah, yeah. I'm Chitra from Bali, from Indonesia. So I'm a lecturer in Udayana University. So especially focus in Wikimedia sister project, Wikisource and Wikidata. So well, this is my my focus. My focus working in traditional Balinese manuscript. So the name is lontar. So lontar is Balinese manuscript made from palm leaf. So this is the palm leaf. So this is the traditional manuscript in Bali. So before the invention of paper, so lontar is utilized in Bali. So yeah, is one. Okay, and I focus Bali has a plenty of lontar, and not only in institution and university collection, but also Bali have a private collection. So in the local houses, so Bali keep a lot of lontar. So lontar is contain a local knowledge. That is very useful for Balinese people. So that's why I started to make this movement with my community in Bali. So because the condition of the lontar is poorly maintained, as you can see in the picture or the image, so that is the real condition in Balinese lontar. So it's really bad. So in the data, Balinese today have a 25,000 lontar and spread out in people houses. This is just a private collection. It's not a library collection. So it's different with the library or museum or government institution collection. So I just focus in people houses collection because the condition is really bad and damaged by environment, and also the owner of manuscript, they don't have a skill to manage or to maintain their lontar. So in 2021, so I and my community have initiated to make one of the project. The name of the project is Balinese Wiki Lontar. So Wiki is the platform that we use to inputting metadata and then retyping for catalog. And Lontar is referred to Lontar itself. Well, what is the important from this project is because our focus in to inputting metadata. So in Bali, we have a plenty of digitalization project. So like a DreamSea and then archive.org also digitize our lontar, but in our project for archive.org, they just digitizing lontar from institution, one of the library in Bali. So I focus in the people housing collection. And then the first initiative, this is the first initiative in Wikimedia Foundation, Wikimedia community, and focus to answer the question, how many lontar do Balinese people have? So because in the previous data that I saw to you, 25,000, so I don't know it's a real lontar is really 25,000 or more than 25,000. So I just want to show the reality of this data. So the data is from a government. So they just say that we have just 25,000 before they have a survey before. So another homework that we still have because we don't have a proper metadata until now. So they don't have a catalogs and then metadata in lontar collection in library as well, agency, institution. So we don't have the proper catalog and proper metadata for this collection. So we inputting metadata. So this is the activity of my community project. So we try to convince the owner of the manuscript first, because lontar in local houses is they just say this is secret things. No one can read it, and the Balinese people make a ceremony for lontar as well. So we have to convince the owner to get a permission to open their collection. So that the first step, and after we got permission. So we will preserve the manuscript to clean the surface of manuscript with citranola oil. And then after that, we collecting metadata in Wikidata and digitizing them just for the first pages and the last pages, because as I said earlier, the Lontar is a secret thing for Balinese people, so they just give me permission just to digitizing the first and the last pages, and after that we make a catalog for the owner of manuscript. And this is the result of the metadata from Wikidata. So the red dot is the position and the location of the Lontars that we made from Wiki Lontar project in 2021. So you can, I will share with you the link of this link for Wikidata. And in another, also we have one of the website that we call it Wiki Pustaka. So Wiki Pustaka is the place kind of digital library for Lontar, especially the new home for Lontar. So you can access plenty of Lontar there, many category as well. So you can also retype again. So as you can see here in the slide, this is the Lontar with a Balinese script, and then you can retype and read together. So this is our product. The last product is a catalog for the owner of the manuscript. So we made this for the owner. So print catalog to the owner, and then online catalog as well. So you can also access for my project with my community. So I think that's all from me. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, everyone. Really appreciate those intros. And while I ask this question, I'm also going to work on spotlighting each of the speakers so that you'll show up for everyone as we get into this conversation. I really want to get into something that we were talking a little bit about as we were prepping, which is balancing this idea of correcting the metadata and preventing this encounter that someone might have within a collection that is harmful. And also not erasing the record that an institution has kept a record in such a way that is harmful, not erasing the history of that that harmful representation or practice. And so would love to hear your thoughts on striking that balance and how you've approached that. I know everyone has sort of approached it in a different way.
I'll go first. I will say I definitely hear that, as something Jill said earlier about having that student who encountered something in this record and felt very seriously harmed by it. I can't imagine being in that situation and I have been in that situation and encountered something kind of horrific. But also I can't imagine, Jill, how it felt to sit across from that person and have to mediate those feelings. I will say at Curationist, we took the policy of only adding more metadata rather than editing, adjusting, censoring, because first of all, because like I said during my little intro talk, we do believe that even that record of harm is information in and of itself, and also because we believe that people who are using our tool are looking for that sort of information. People come to Curationist to see the metadata record in addition to seeing the images. So I think it's frequently a matter of knowing what people are going to use your tool, your record, your search feature for. And I think that's a big part of the conversation that we're having, is this difference between metadata as a search tool, metadata as a way to find and discover things, versus metadata as a historical record in and of itself. And I think we have to be very thoughtful about what people are expecting when they come to use our tools, when they come to use our libraries, etc.
Marco, go ahead. I see you have your hand raised.
Yeah, well, I'm just following up because we are more or less on the same line. I think I showed you which is our practical approach to this. And and again, we are not erasing or correcting. And I think here, I think we should make a distinction. I think this was mentioned by Amanda briefly. One thing, in my opinion, are subject headings or finding aids, like authority file. These are instruments that are used to discover, in a way, well, like all metadata actually, but these are really kind of meta tools to access the collections. And I think correcting them is something that is not, let's say, violating any archival rules in a way, or erasing anything. So I think that what Jill is doing, so correcting and changing subject headings, is something that I would do, let's say. So it's something that should be done. What we are trying to face instead in our case is metadata, like descriptions of titles in library archives and museums, that we want to preserve for future research in terms of how the language was used at the time. But of course, we are aware of the fact that it can harm eventually even people, visitors, users. And so we had this approach that we warn users that that record can contain harmful language. And if the user wants to continue, then we provide extra information. Like Amanda is doing in her initiative, we try to add information and contextual information and background information that explain why that specific term is could be is outdated or could be even harmful. So we decided not to erase in this case the information, but I think we are talking about two different things. So I wanted again to stress the difference, in my opinion, between actual metadata like titles of description of objects and subject headings used to classify the content by an institution like a library, in this case, a Library of Congress. So I don't know if Jill understand this difference, because we had this discussion very briefly last time that we spoke, and but I wanted to reiterate this concept that, in my opinion, is quite fundamental. There is a difference between finding aids and actual metadata, original metadata.
Yeah, thanks, Marco. I appreciate that, making that distinction, and I think I agree. And I would just say that there's a couple things that I think I want to touch on here. One is that you know, for this descriptive metadata that we're talking about, like Library of Congress subject headings, you know, there is a long-standing process in place to revise headings, add new headings, you know, that is at the Library of Congress, that's, you know, been in place for a long time, that's changing. That's actually, you know, I think as a result of a lot of the activity and the conversation around this is opening up to the community a little bit more, which is really great to see. But it's not, this is not a new endeavor, right? Like subject headings have been the product of revision for a long time, because we've known for a long time that language evolves. We have to keep up with that. I would say, you know, I'm sort of the, I guess, belief that a doubter for sure, that, you know, the metadata is a tool, right? That, you know, and this is based on my very sort of, I'm a practitioner, right? Like I work with researchers. I try and connect them. I try to, I need to use the tools to get to the content, right? I appreciate those who have an interest in sort of the evolution of metadata as a site of you know, for analysis itself. But I really just want it to work, and I don't want friction, you know, in that process, even though the friction, of course, you know, has given rise, this friction in particular has given rise to like an incredible, just conversation on these topics. So what am I getting at? So, I mean, for me personally, I am of the sort of camp that, we do need to revise our metadata. We do need to stay on top of it. There are other ways to research the evolution of terms used in description than using the actual tool that connects us to the content. So that's one thing. But I totally appreciate and respect the approach that Amanda is taking. And I think, not having looked at your site yet, or having looked closely at what Marco's doing, I do think it's just really important, and you're probably already doing this, to be transparent about this is our approach, right? We are aware of these issues, and this is our choice, and this is what we're doing, right? And so the user has the opportunity to learn that and understand that there's really like kind of intellectual energy. There's also care behind the choices that are being made to maintain these systems.
Great. And Chitra, anything to add on this topic?
Yeah, I think I just have my opinion here in Bali. So I just want to share with all of you. Here in Bali, I'm not recognized about this topic actually, but I just want to share about in Bali, we just try to begin to make a metadata for manuscript, especially. So my focus is for manuscript, especially for Lontar, because we still have a gap for metadata from book, and then from another, like images or another. So in Bali, yeah, we just started to make this. So I just listen all of you the experience about everything, but yeah, I am the beginner in this field. So we just input in the Wikidata. So that's the first yeah, first initiative from my community. So I think yeah, that's still ongoing until now. Yeah, thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. So my next question is, a lot of you are talking about how this impacts communities, and how there are folks who are sort of the inheritors of culture that aren't necessarily being held in institutions that are in their locations or in their countries or that represent them. I'm wondering, how do you engage with communities in your work and in this decision-making process?
I can start if you allow me. But this is as I mentioned, quite an important part of our work in the bias, but it's probably the most difficult one, in the sense that our original aim was, of course, to work and co-create this vocabulary of terms, of problematic terms, together with communities, marginalized communities, in the different topics that we are tackling and that I mentioned. But this is not easy to do in general, and it's very difficult to do in a short time frame, in the sense that, of course, this is a co-funded project by the European Commission, so we have a starting date and end date, and the project will last 24 months. In 24 months, it's extremely hard to establish connection with communities, gain trust, and starting a discussion, let's say. This is the main obstacle we are facing. Of course, we came in some cases from a privileged position, because some of the institutions are working with us, like the Dutch Film Institute or the Netherlands Institute for Sound and Vision, or KU Leuven University, were already working with some of those communities, and so they have already a sort of running relationship. But in some other cases, this is actually, because we are working on this, is quite difficult. So I think that working with communities is the only way to go in these cases, because otherwise the risk is to reiterate let's say, Western views and let's say not having a polyvocal, let's say, discussion on this topic. But practically speaking, I can say from our experience, it's not easy. It's quite difficult because this takes time. Is a very rewarding process. I think is a very enriching process for cultural heritage institutions, but is complex and requires a lot of time. So if I one takeout from our project is exactly this: if you want to establish a relationship with communities as cultural heritage institution or a research institution, you need time, because you need to gain trust, and also there is the another issue is the remuneration. So if you want to engage communities, you should think that you are paid to do your job, but they are not paid to follow you in your activities. So eventually you should find ways to remunerate their contribution. So there are several aspects that requires attention, and overall, while I think is the only way to go, it's at least for us was more difficult than expected.
I'll just jump in and say that there are activities in the library and archives profession that are community-based. So thinking about community more like within sort of our professional realm, but they're really sort of networks of people who are really focused on these issues around metadata justice, about, sort of getting it right, or, trying to improve the systems we use. And so I just want to make people aware of them, because that might be something, even whether or not you're in the library and archives profession, or you're adjacent, or you're just kind of here because you're interested in the topic, like there's still room for you, there's space for you. One of them is an initiative called the Cataloging Lab that's really spearheaded by Violet Fox, who's a great person and an incredible librarian and cataloger. Also a very good person to follow on Twitter, if that's what people still call it, I don't know. But the Cataloging Lab is a space where people can collaborate on recommending changes to subject headings or new headings, things of that nature. There is quite a strong sort of collaborative effort in the library and archives community to address these issues. And so, but they are not only, open to like people in the profession. They do, of course, seek input and cooperation from people outside the profession, but it's what Marco, brings up. There's a question of remuneration. There's questions of just time and capacity. And so, yeah, that's definitely a challenge.
I'll say for Curationists, right now, the major way that we're involving communities at the grassroots level who don't come in as institutional partners, who aren't in this pipeline to digitize and contribute their data to our aggregator and other similar ones, is really through our Critics of Color program and our fellowship program. We open for applications every spring. If you're interested, please drop me a note. And one of the ways that we evaluate the applications from potential critics and fellows is if their research project or the sort of types of object records that they've indicated they want to work with is something that is sort of a home community to them. I don't necessarily mean it's the community they were born into, but certainly that it's a community that they have already developed significant relationships with, in addition to having undertaken significant research on. That's absolutely central to us. We're not interested in sort of recreating that dynamic of a external academic researcher becoming an authority on a community that they haven't become themselves involved in. we've gotten amazing outside opinions, research, thought, community partnerships from our critics and our fellows. And we're looking forward to doing that more. And of course, in terms of remuneration, all of our critics and fellows are afforded a stipend for their term with us. And we are always actively fundraising in order to continue increasing that stipend as high as we can.
So for Wiki Lontar activity or Wiki Lontar project, so after 2021, we have a collaboration with institution and government in Bali. So because the step is very long to convince the owner of the manuscript. So first, I have a collaboration with one of staff or from government to help me to know who is the Balinese people that have a Lontar manuscript or Lontar. So and for another activity, so we carry out together. It's not just only I and my community members, but also the young generation. So for example, my student in university who want to join in my movement. So my student have one subject, especially for Lontar preservation and computerization for Balinese script. So they will join with me to clean the Lontar, for example. So because the pages of Lontar is very a lot of variation of the pages, so we need help from many people. Actually, the young generation. So for inputting metadata, so I also have a collaboration with another university that have tools to understand about the computers as well. Apart from that, so we also have a competition to retyping Lontar in our website in Wiki Pustaka. So that's just one of the attempt that we can encourage the engagement for a young generation to know more about Lontar. So we hope after this project, so the further maintenance can be carried out independent by Balinese people. So and the young generation will feel closer to Lontar. So that's our hope in my community. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. Okay, so I would love to open it up to audience questions. I saw one in the chat so far. Please feel free to raise your hands and I can get to questions in audio that way. So the question in the chat was, how can an indexer use modern terms to cross-reference outdated terms?
In our case, what we do is because the problem of scaling, it was mentioned before by Amanda, the fact that for example in aggregators like Europeana, you have 50 million records, and of course it's impossible to think about going through them, all every single of them, and check for the language. Considering also that in Europeana there are 50 million records in 24 different languages. That's why we are trying to work on a multilingual thesaurus vocabulary. The idea that how we are trying to tackle this is that since we are creating a sort of knowledge graph, so we have not just a list of terms in multiple languages, but we can also have alternative labels, let's say, for these terms. So once we have a let's say listed a outdated or inappropriate or harmful term, then we can also add an alternative label, so a proper term that can be used instead of that. So when what we do is, when our AI system detect the problematic term, we offer, as I was mentioning before, contextual information, but also we suggest the alternative term. And what we would like to do, we are not there yet, is also to eventually add to the record the proper term, let's say the correct term, so that this can be indexed And so users, visitors of the Europeana portal that are going to search for the proper terms, let's say, we find also records in which this term was not used and instead was used another inappropriate term. So I don't know if I made myself clear, but this is how we are trying to solve these. Of course, it's easier to do that with a structure like a knowledge graph. But of course, we are relying on an automatic system. So this is not bulletproof in the sense that the system can make mistakes and detect terms that are not used in an offensive way, or can miss terms that instead are offensive. But I mean, we are trying to scale in this dimension. When you have millions of records, you should find automated ways to tackle this issue.
Wonderful. Anyone else want to jump in on that, or I could get to another question? Okay, great. Someone was writing, I think this is only a problem in the US. It doesn't affect Germany in the same way, something along these lines. I guess I'll just jump in here and say, like, I think there are probably problematic terms in most contexts, especially Western contexts. And so I don't know that it's possible that that's true, but also maybe some of the panelists can weigh in and think about, like, you know, there are some problems that are unique to certain contexts, but might show up in different ways in other contexts, and how to maybe identify where those are.
Yeah, I can jump in on this one. So my understanding from the question is that Christina agrees that, you know, it's a problem no matter what language, but that in working with folks in these other countries or contexts, there may not be the same sympathies or, you know, interests in addressing the issue. At the risk of like tooting my own horn, I try and stay like humble, but I would recommend that you watch the documentary, because I think that through storytelling, we are able to communicate the impact of this language, these words in the metadata on actual people. And that's what we've heard over and over again in Q&As and audience feedback, and, you know, on and on about the film, that it really made vivid why this matters. And so I would just, you know, share the link with these curators that you work with. Maybe you want to organize like a little screening in their workplaces, just to kind of, you know, provoke some conversation around that.
I'd also add to that, something we talk about a lot at Curationist is that in addition to being a wild social good, right? This is just the right thing to do. It's important. We should do it. That's true. But I think this question asker is completely right. Sometimes that's just not enough to motivate people, or people say, oh, it's not that big of a deal. Or actually, I do hear a lot, especially in international communities, that's a US thing. You guys have to deal with that. We're good. So if you're not breaking through with that sort of social justice mission, again, while valid and important and a good enough reason in its own right to do this, another good reason is that it's a practical good. Adding more diverse, more compassionate, more ethically minded search terms, metadata records, helps our objects become more findable. And I have yet to meet a curator or a librarian who doesn't want people to see and engage with the items that are in the collection. So focusing on the practical aspects, like making things more findable, and also I also talk a lot about future-proofing collections in this way. You want the metadata terms to stay current with the contemporary language being used, so that they stay findable, so that we're not losing more historical records. And again, all of that is true. Just like how building ramps to enter libraries makes everybody's life easier, adding more compassionate, ethically minded search terms makes everybody's life easier. It's a practical good in addition to being a social justice good.
Thank you. Okay, I think I'm going to try and squeeze in one more question before we close, which is how do you approach the question of platforms and subsequently archiving and reuse of produced materials, as well as the sustainability of these choices?
I'm not sure I understood correctly your question. So you want to understand which is the relation of, I mean, which are the problem with platform that aggregate content, which I think I didn't get you.
Sure. This was a question from Susanna. Do you want to open your mic and maybe ask? Wonderful.
Yeah, okay. Well, it's well, to show my cards, I'm maybe talking in favor of Wikimedia projects, but maybe expanding from there. How do you make the materials that the new metadata, the new connections, the new equivalencies, reusable and archivable and shareable, and whether it's related to platforms or not. I don't know if that made any more sense. So how do you store and share? And what's your plan?
In our case, if I may start, if I understood correctly, well, in our case, as I mentioned, we are working basically on one specific aggregator, a very big one, which is a Europeana.eu, which aggregates content from more than 4,000 cultural institutions across Europe. So metadata are in multiple languages. They are mapped in a uniform format. So this is an advantage. But then we have the multilinguality issue and the fact that also content is coming from a multitude of sources, and the overall number of this is quite huge. So yeah, I mean, we had to deal with this since the very beginning, and so we tried to tackle the problem of multilinguality, even if of course we are not going to solve it completely, obviously. And we are trying also to tackle the issue of heterogeneous sources. Yeah, this is and again, we are trying to tackle this issue. I'm not saying that we have solved it all of them, but we were in a position in which these were the constraint, let's say, that we had since the very beginning. So at least we have these problems quite in mind, quite in front of us, and so we are trying more or less effectively to tackle them. I don't know if I gave a reply to your question, but yeah.
Anyone else want to comment on that? Okay, well, thank you all so much for joining. This was a really wonderful conversation, and it was really amazing to see how each of you tackle this in unique ways in your own contexts. Thank you for the audience members for joining. We will be publishing a recording of this webinar so that you can share it with your friends and colleagues and pass the word along. Any final words from you, Brigitte, before we go?
I wanted to thank you, Jocelyn, for organizing this webinar and running it so nicely. Thank you to all the experts or less experts that joined us. We definitely appreciated your comments, where you were coming from. And thank you to the participants for all your questions and all your comments in the chat. It was a very lively discussion. So yeah, as Jocelyn said, we'll be reporting on the key highlights and sharing the recording. So feel free to engage with us after this too. So thank you very much and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone. This was really special.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.